Last summer, I was looking for an internship to boost my resume and found myself working with a group called Retain Adjust Nebraska, a campaign dedicated to opposing the death penalty. While I had always personally opposed the death penalty, it wasn't until working with this campaign that I came to understand the devastation that this failed policy has had on our country. Over the next 6 months of my daily involvement with the group, I had opportunities such as traveling across Nebraska with exonerated people like Derek Jameson, who spent 20 years on Ohio's death row for a crime he didn't commit. I also got to travel with people like Marietta Jaeger Lane and Bess Clausen Landis, who lost loved ones to murder but still spoke out against the death penalty because they realized that vengeance would not bring them peace. I felt motivated by a Pew Research Center study that showed that 49% of Americans supported the death penalty in 2016, an all-time low, and down sharply from 80% just 20 years before. However, as I traveled Nebraska, speaking in town halls, coffee houses, and churches in towns like Henderson, North Platte, and Hastings, I found that there are many good and thoughtful people in our state with terrible misconceptions about the death penalty. And these misconceptions have been allowed to endure because opponents have not done a good enough job refuting them. In 2016, 3 states held initiatives on this issue, and the death penalty won in all 3 states, in large part due to persistent myths about the death penalty that opponents have not been able to effectively argue against. These votes are likely to continue to occur, making it imperative not only that we oppose the death penalty, but know how to communicate effectively against it. The movement to end the death penalty has momentum, but in order to end it for good, we need to reevaluate and improve our communication and arguments about this issue. So today, we'll look at 3 problems in death penalty communication. Then in each point, look at how to rhetorically refute each of these problems before finally looking at action steps that can be taken. Because in the words of Nobel Peace Prize winner Desmond Tutu, to take a life when a life has been lost is revenge, not justice. Last fall, I traveled to beautiful Seward, Nebraska to take part in a debate with Chris Peterson, a local Republican operative and a spokesperson for Nebraskans for the death penalty. Mr. Peterson consistently called the death penalty a needed deterrent, something he believed would save innocent lives in the future. This leads us to look at our first problem, the deterrence argument. We'll analyze this problem, look at how to rhetorically refute it, and finally look at action steps that can be taken in this realm. In 2009, a study by University of Colorado professors Michael Radelais and Tracy Lecoq showed that 88% of criminologists believe the death penalty does not deter crime at all, citing no link between states with low crime rates and states with a functional death penalty. Thus, when someone makes the deterrence argument, we must first prove that the deterrence claim is false, but then we must appeal to their concern for innocent life. The Death Penalty Information Center reports that since 1976, 157 people have been exonerated or freed from death rows across the country, while dozens more who were innocent were wrongly executed. In 1985, George and Charlene White were shot in their Alabama hardware store. George was severely wounded, and Charlene died immediately. And then George was falsely accused of his wife's murder and sentenced to death. Fortunately, George was exonerated in 1992, but he was one of the lucky ones. In April 2014, the most comprehensive study ever done on the issue by legal experts and statisticians from the universities of Michigan and Pennsylvania showed that 1 in every 25 people executed in the U.S. has been innocent. And they stressed that this was a deliberately conservative figure. The government recalls products with mortality rates far less than 4% with regularity. And so when people ground their concerns in a concern for innocent life, we must make clear the cost to innocent life incurred by the death penalty itself. We need to encourage people to get involved in groups like Witness to Innocence, a group that advocates for the eventual exoneration of innocent people falsely stuck on death row. On the website for this organization, it offers a portal where those who want to help out can be placed, or given an opportunity to volunteer with the group. There's also a portal for those who wish to donate financially. In the words of Russian playwright Anton Chekhov, the state is not God. It has not the right to take away that which it cannot restore. In my 6 months working with Retain Adjust Nebraska, I found that many death penalty opponents grounded their appeals with moral arguments. And while these worked to persuade some people, they didn't get into the pragmatic problems that the death penalty brings about, such as cost and government waste. Many death penalty supporters assume the death penalty is cheaper than its alternatives, leading us to look at our second problem, false assumptions of cost. We'll then look at how to rhetorically refute these assumptions before looking at action steps in the financial realm. Now, many death penalty supporters assume the death penalty costs less than life in prison without parole. And when met with numbers that disprove this notion, many reply the way right-wing columnist Debbie Kidd did in a September 6, 2016 column on her website, News with Views. Kidd wrote, "Just take those animals out and shoot them." But that is not how the death penalty works. There's a years-long, multi-million-dollar appeals process that inmates must go through before they can be executed. The cost argument appeals to those who are concerned about wasteful government spending. Last year, Forbes reported that in California, maintaining death row costs $137 million a year, compared to the $11.5 million that would cost to keep the same amount of people in prison over the same length of time. The death penalty is more expensive than life in prison due to the additional cost of prosecuting a capital case, the additional infrastructure needed to maintain death row, and most of all, the costly appeals process. The wrongful actions by prosecutors can have harmful financial consequences as well. In Gage County, Nebraska, a group known as the Beatrice Six was recently rewarded $28 million after being falsely accused of murdering an elderly woman 30 years ago. The Omaha World-Herald of October 6, 2016 explains that this small Nebraska county now has to find $28 million because prosecutors 30 years ago weren't willing to spend a little over $1,000 on tests that would have proven the Six innocent to begin with. Sharing these facts and stories can be imperative for making clear how costly and inefficient the death penalty is as a government institution. Conservatives concerned about the death penalty is a group that looks at the issue from this vantage point. The group has been pivotal in building up Republican opposition to the death penalty in state houses across the country. Donating to or supporting conservatives concerned about the death penalty could be pivotal for building the type of bipartisan coalitions that will be necessary to end the death penalty on a state-by-state level. The loss of life should not be a partisan issue, but one where people of all political backgrounds and beliefs could work together. Speaking of Republican state legislators, former Nebraska State Senator Colby Koash, the Republican co-chair of Retain Adjust Nebraska, recalls having a very different view of the death penalty when he was in college. On nights of executions in Nebraska, he would go to the Nebraska execution chamber with his fraternity brothers to drink and party the night away, to ostensibly celebrate justice. While now disgusted by his past actions, Koash acknowledges that at the time, he saw the death penalty as a fair and just form of punishment, leading us to look at our third problem, the perception that the death penalty is a fair, just form of punishment. We'll finally analyze this problem, look at how to rhetorically refute it, and finally, look at action steps in this area. According to the aforementioned Pew Research Center survey, 90% of those who support the death penalty believe it to be morally justified. Fortunately, prejudice often affects how punishments are actually doled out. The Guardian, on January 3rd, 2012, reports that 56% of Americans on death row are Black or Hispanic, a disproportionate share. And even more jarring, while a majority of murder victims in the U.S. are Black or Hispanic, 77% of the victims of death row inmates were white. And in states like Alabama, that have no Black appellate judges, and where Black people have been routinely struck from juries as recently as 2015, Slightly, the statistics don't even show the whole story of how many innocent minorities have been given unfair punishments for crimes that they may or may not have committed. Now, issues with race and class abound throughout the criminal justice system. But when it comes to a matter of life and death, it's all the more imperative that we take a step back and make sure no innocent lives are lost. Noted civil rights lawyer and death penalty opponent Bryan Stevenson wrote about the racism and classism that deeply have affected the criminal justice system in his book, Just Mercy. I encourage everyone to read Mr. Stevenson's book, because trust me, you will be outraged. Fortunately, you can donate to Stevenson's group, the Equal Justice Institute. This group provides legal services and advocates for those who have been given unfair sentences for crimes that they didn't commit, or for crimes where they were given unfair sentences due to their race or class. Bryan Stevenson put the issue of capital punishment best. He explained that the issue of the death penalty is not whether people deserve to die for the crimes they commit, but rather, the issue of capital punishment in our country is whether we deserve to kill. While my campaign that I worked for was not successful, it was still one of the most important experiences of my college career. Along the way, I saw hearts and minds changed. And I believe that with more effective communication and a willingness to appeal to the individual concerns of people in ways that they'll understand and empathize with, we can take action to hopefully end the cruelest and most unusual of all punishments.